Anina Bennett.
And we are 20 plus veterans of the comic book industry.
20 plus years.
Something like that.
We're also married, if you couldn't tell by now.
I got my start as a staff artist. Maybe like first comics. Right out of college, I brought my portfolio to a local comic book publisher in the city I was living in, Chicago. And they liked my work enough to put me on staff. And after a few years of doing things like retouching, keyline pasting and stuff.
In the pre-computer days, so this was all doing actual paste up with actual, glue or wax, and everything was physical, big old stack cameras.
And I started to see work come in that I thought, oh, I can do just as good as this. I should maybe give up my staff job and go freelance, ink or pencil from home, not have to get up in the morning. So
that was his main career goal, I think.
So I took that leap of faith, and after I did that, Anina was in a position to work at First Comics as a staff artist because they had a rule that boyfriends and girlfriends, husband and wives could work at the same company.
Right. So at the time, we were in our 20s, and I was working as an editor, and I knew a bunch of the people at First because all lived there on staff, and there's a whole other story about me and Toasting before then that I'm not going to tell. And they, to my great surprise, at one point called me up and said, "Hey, there's an editorial position open. If you think you should apply for it." And I didn't have any experience editing comics or editing periodicals, but I had read comics since I was a little kid, and I was young and inexpensive at the time, and now I'm old and slightly more expensive. And so they hired me, and I wound up being the editor of Nexus, Jack, Whisper. For a while, I was editing the Lone Wolf and Cub translated version that they were doing, and that was my first editorial job. And then while I was doing that, and while I was freelancing, he was doing work for Dark Horse, and we started developing a concept together that we pitched around to several different companies, which became
Heartbreakers, which was the first female action hero series in comics as opposed to a costume superhero female character. So we had success with this early on, and we started doing digest graphic novels. And then Anina got an offer from Dark Horse to move out to Portland from Chicago to work with them as a staff editor there. So we made the move and went out to Portland, started working for Dark Horse.
So that was in the early 90s, and I worked on staff at Dark Horse from between about 1991 and 1996, and I also had a stint at Egmont Publishing, which does Disney comics in Europe. So they do Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck stories. For a brief time, I lived in Copenhagen while I was working for them, which was absolutely glorious, and I still thank them for that to this day. And Paul got to come over and spend some time with me there, which was wonderful.
Also around this time, because of my success with Dark Horse, I established quite a name for myself in the industry, and I was given the great privilege of creating a new character for the DC universe with Archie Goodwin, who's a legendary editor. And so I conceived this thing with writer John Francis Moore of a time-traveling superhero. So a big history buff, and I wanted to do something that had a lot of period settings. So I did this series called Chronos, which was an extension of the Silver Age Flash film in comics, but this was a new guy. And that ran for about a year or so. And then after that...
And that was one of the last series developed by the late great Archie Goodwin.
That was the last series, yeah. That was his last book. And I was very privileged to be able to work with such a legend. So after that, I then started to develop a new concept called Boilerplate, about a robot history. And when I first conceived it, since I've been working in comics for so many years, I've naturally gravitated towards the format of a graphic novel. So I began to execute my concept as a graphic novel, but then quickly decided that it needed a new approach. So these are the unfinished, this is the unfinished graphic novel that never was. So ultimately, I started playing around with the idea of telling the story as if it was a real history, like the kind of pop history books that Time Life used to put out.
Well, the first thing that we did, we should tell at least this part of the story. The first thing that we did in print with Boilerplate was actually this crossover team-up book with Heartbreakers. And Paul's artwork on this is all digital. I actually posed for all of the clone characters, so I play like 7 different characters in here. And his artwork was nominated for an Eisner the year that this came out, which is a great honor. And what we did was we took some of the stories that Paul had already posted on our website, which at that time were becoming very popular. They were starting to get a lot of press. People were posting blogs all over the place. We used that as the robot's backstory. So this was actually the first time that Boilerplate appeared in print. And around the same time, there was a novel that came out. This was one of the struggles for us and also for the person who wrote the novel. There was a novel that came out called The Shroud of the Whacker that was a time travel murder mystery spoof that featured Boilerplate as one of the supporting characters, unknown to us until the novel was published, and unknown to the novel's author. Boilerplate was in fact Paul's creation. The author thought that Boilerplate was a 19th century hoax, like the Piltdown Man or something. So, he was like, oh, obviously there was no walking, talking robot in 1893, but what a cool idea that someone convinced people that there was one in 1893. So that felt like a really big setback at the time because we thought we might have to report over it. As it turned out, we didn't. The author was very, contrite and embarrassed when he found out what had happened or what he had actually done.
So when we started with the book, this incident with this other author appropriating our character happened, and it generated enough publicity for a local publisher to offer us a book deal, which we took. And so then we were starting on this book in earnest.
Oh, that's what Paul always wanted to do, is this coffee table book.
This coffee table book. But then, about a year into working on that, the coffee table book publisher went bankrupt.
Well, no, their primary distributor went bankrupt and basically took down a bunch of publishers with them because that's really hard on small publishers when something like that happens. And so they wanted to repackage it and sell it to somebody else, and that just never kind of went anywhere. And so we were like, this book's 80% done. What are we going to do?
So luckily I ran into, and this is the advantage of going to after parties and schmoozing with people, I ran into somebody at a party who was an agent, and I told her about this project, and she took us on, and she shopped at New York and got Abrams, which is a fancy art coffee table book publisher, who doesn't usually do fictions like this. They usually do like monographs about artists or places or things like that. And so this was kind of a leap of faith. But we had enough material from our previous publishing venture that they got it, they understood what
So we had most of the manuscript and most of the images ready already. And as it turned out, we loved working with them, they made gorgeous books, we got an advance, which we would not have gotten from the other publisher, which enabled us to finish the book. And that is what turned into this beautiful book. And Abrams' books I just can't say enough about how great they are. They really love making beautiful books. They hired, we've done 2 books with them. We have a new one that just came out last month. So this came out in 2009 finally. And they hired this design team and then let us art direct the book, because they understood that we had a vision and that this was a form of visual narrative that's not a graphic novel, but it also requires the images to go in a certain order and there's a certain flow to the whole thing.
So it's akin to almost like a textbook, but way more fun than any textbook I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
But the Boilerplate had several setbacks that then later turned out to be okay.
Right,
So graphic novel, no. A coffee table book. Oh yeah, great. A coffee table book. Oh no, the publisher goes bankrupt. Oh wait a minute, somebody's stealing our character. Oh yeah.
So finally the book comes out in 2009, and by that time we had a preview of it on our table at Comic-Con in San Diego, and all these people in Hollywood were like, what is this? What is this? Is this optioned yet? But we were already talking to a production company that had shown interest in it before it got to that stage. And
they were aware of it when it was just us, a team-up graphic novel and a website.
And we'd already been through this with Heartbreakers, where people would get excited about it and try to sell it, and we would get excited and get this close to a deal, and then it just never happened. We have a lot of friends who've gone through that kind of stuff. Things often get optioned and never made. At least you can live on the option money when that happens.
Heartbreakers was optioned twice, and a screenplay was written, but nothing ever happened.
So we're like, well, you know, it'd be great if they can do something with it. We felt kind of loyal to them because they had been interested in the character before the book came out. And long story short, what ultimately wound up happening was that when they decided to now it's time to we got to get a producer and director attached, and they asked us, who do you want us to approach? And the new Star Trek movie had just come out, and we were like, well, start at the top, J.J. Abrams, you know? What the hell? He'll probably say no, but then there's lots of other good people in the next tier. And part of you want to say why we wanted to approach him specifically?
Well, yeah, I'd seen the Star Trek film and was impressed with how they handled all of this backstory, huge unwieldy history of the Star Trek universe, and yet we're able to tell a story that didn't rely on that. So Boilerplate needs that kind of approach, a story that doesn't rely on your knowledge of Teddy Roosevelt or Pancho Villa for the audience to appreciate.
Because we're history wonks, and Boilerplate is really a history book with a robot.
So this producer said, oh yeah, I know him, we can put the book in front of him. So JJ saw the book, he didn't see a treatment, he wasn't pitched in a meeting. So he fell in love with the book itself, and it speaks to him on a lot of levels, not just the retro sci-fi thing, but also this idea of parallel realities that he seems to be obsessed with in all of his work.
Right,
so this might as well be a parallel reality. So he's a big fan of the book, and now the movie is moving forward, and screenwriters are attached, and it looks like it's going to happen.
Yeah. So we are the classic example of the 20-year overnight success, because now everybody's like, we have this little tiny sign drawn in Sharpie on our table that says soon to be a major motion picture from J.J. Abrams, and people are like, J.J. Abrams, and our book got great reviews, and we did another book that just came out from Abrams last month that's set in the same universe basically, which is also getting great reviews. And from some people's perspective who don't know our history in the comic book industry, we just came out of nowhere. And they're like, what are these people with this crazy robot book? So, but Boilerplate was, as we've just explained, was pretty much a 10-year process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but then each of those things we kind of lead to something else unexpected. And we just kept toughing it out and pushing and pushing and pushing, because this was our goal, was to do our own work and do it, you know, the way that we wanted to do it.
And I got nothing better to do.
And I was working full-time jobs during most of this period in comics and in other industries, and we're now finally at the point where we're both freelance and we feel like we're going to be able to stick it out that way.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, so the motto is never give up, never surrender.